After selling out London's Royal Albert Hall twice, three of rock's greatest guitarists decided to take it even further. Bigger venues, higher stakes, and for Jimmy Page, a return to America after 6 long years. What followed was one of the most ambitious tours of the 1980s, and one of the most complicated stories, one that would take a turn no one saw coming. It was the 4th week of September 1983, and the All-Star Rock and Roll Ensemble played back-to-back shows at London's prestigious Royal Albert Hall. Fronted by Gary Clapton, Jeff Beck, and Jimmy Page, the concerts managed to raise funds for their dear friend, musician Ronnie Lane, who battled multiple sclerosis since the late 70s. Because logistics and performances flowed with great spirits, the thought of repeating the historic feat grew in the minds of staff, promoters, and the former Yardbirds, now brothers in arms. For Jimmy Page, it was a boost of adrenaline to slowly get back in the game, and his path was another famous rocker in somewhat similar circumstances. Paul Rodgers and Page were now former members of hugely popular bands whose last studio albums were released in 1982. They were former Swan Song record label mates, and now a 40-minute drive away from each other. Paul Rodgers was putting the finishing touches on his solo album debut, Cut Loose, aiming for a November release. It was recorded at his home studio in Kingston, featuring Rodgers on every instrument, drums included. Jimmy Page and Paul Rodgers began a casual musical partnership through jamming ideas and such. Then Page brought him an old Zeppelin instrumental demo, a physical graffiti idea that remained unfinished. Rodgers worked out lyrics for it, and Swan Song became Midnight Moonlight. October 1983. The UK's Daily Mirror talked about Jeff Beck and Rod Stewart traveling to Los Angeles for a secret recording session of a promising track, People Get Ready. The article said, quote, both artists are signed by different labels, and the song may never see the light of day. Rock and roll fans were hit with impending news of Pink Floyd's breakup and Roger Waters finishing the recording of his yet-to-be-released debut album, featuring Eric Clapton on guitar and Arms Show's percussion extraordinaire, Ray Cooper. On the other side of the Atlantic, the idea of bringing the Arms Show to America grew stronger. It was an easy show to market, and Clapton had already played the States earlier that year, but there was a problem. Touring the States October through December meant the start of the NBA season, thus many possible venues had a busy basketball schedule to deal with. Among the bands playing the US at the time were Genesis, AC/DC, and Asia. So which promoter would take on the Arms USA task? Both Oakland and San Francisco newspapers discussed the historic London events in what seemed like casual mentions, but in retrospect, there was a reason. The local papers meant there was already a promoter behind an Arms USA tour, rock impresario Bill Graham. I've talked about him in my previous episodes like my Santana and California Jam titles. He was now light years away from the Fillmore days, with his most recent events, the US Festival 82 and 83 editions. Always controversial, he remained a big name in the rock business, and he quickly saw the promotional angle for Arms, a Yardbirds reunion. Although he worked with Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck before, there was Jimmy Page, whose band Led Zeppelin was a dark chapter for Bill Graham, more specifically the band's last American shows at Oakland, July 1977. You can check my 2-part episode for a detailed recollection of events and the shocking aftermath. A 1978 Cream magazine issue had Page share his thoughts on the promoter, so you think Graham would be hesitant to work with anything related to Jimmy again. But there was a wildcard: Robert Plant's USA tour of 1983. Bill Graham worked on his Oakland Coliseum date, and his radio interview at the time sheds light on how the Zeppelin past was let go.
I feel very bad about that because over the years, Robert not only was a friend, and when we met in the lobby, in the backstage lobby of the Oakland Coliseum a couple of weeks ago, that was the cloud overhead, and he remarked how strangely clean I looked for some reason or other. And it was just a conversation with a genuinely soft gentleman.
The Robert Plant effect, I believe, contributed to the Arms Show overcoming a potential roadblock. Wheels were set in motion, booking agencies, travel plans, everybody working to bring Clapton, Beck, and Page to the States. By the first week of November 1983, American news outlets launched the press releases. They talked about the previous Arms shows in London, but slowly moved towards strong rumors of a mini Yardbirds reunion and multiple sclerosis fundraiser featuring the promotional and marketing order of Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, and Jeff Beck. Bill Graham held a press conference on November 9th, making it official. an all-star cast by the name of The British Are Coming would play 8 dates in 4 American cities. One extra date was quickly added for a total of 9 shows. Tickets went out immediately at a price of $20. Contrary to expectations, only 2 cities were immediate sellouts, which forced the staff to double down on marketing and promotional efforts to battle the fact neither Page, Beck, nor Clapton were featured on MTV. Although it was not mentioned in the press, there was a big reason American fans did buy their tickets like there was no tomorrow. Led Zeppelin's anticipated comeback to the United States in October 1980 was still an open wound, a shattered dream in the light of tragic news of John Bonham's passing. Fast forward 1983, and Jimmy Page, Zozo himself, was to perform his first ever American shows since 1977, while reruns of The Song Remains the Same kept going, turning into a cult classic and the only way to experience their mystique. Yes, we can say fans also wanted to see Clapton, Beck, and the All-Star Band, but Page and Zeppelin were America's sweethearts, and America wanted Stairway to Heaven one last time. While Robert Plant avoided playing Zeppelin material in '83, little did the States know they would actually get it. The ARMS lineup was ready, but some names changed from the one that rocked London back in September. The great Steve Winwood would not be a part of the late 1983 entourage. While there's no exact reason for his absence, he performed recording duties for David Gilmour and Christine McVie's albums at the time. But when we look at his replacements, speculation becomes just natural. Jimmy Page invited Paul Rodgers to join the tour because of their ongoing collaboration in the UK. A no-brainer it was for Rodgers. He would sing the Jimmy Page set and enjoy a once-in-a-lifetime experience next to his colleagues. The ARMS tour also welcomed Joe Cocker. There were strong ties. Jimmy Page and Chris Staten had worked on his 1969 debut, while Clapton contributed to his 1976 album Stingray. By 1983, his recording career had slowed, and despite a recent Grammy win, he wasn't the chart presence he once was. The tour offered something different, a return to the major stages and a chance to reconnect with audiences. You can say he got a little help from his friends. Another branch of the Rolling Stones family tree was added to the ARMS touring group. Co-founder and legendary pianist Ian Stewart. By 1983, his most recent studio credit included a small role on the Stones' Undercover, but his connection to these shows ran far deeper. 2 Ronnie Lane albums, and his unmistakable piano on Led Zeppelin's Rock and Roll, and the aptly titled Boogie with Stu from Physical Graffiti. Joining the tour along his British peers felt like a natural extension, finally sharing the stage with his closest circle. He would pass away in 1985. Last but not least, Jeff Beck brought in a different keyboardist from the September shows. The American dates feature the virtuoso work of Jan Hammer, already a household name among musicians for his electrifying chops. In the early 80s, he had worked with Al Di Meola and Journey's Neil Schon, and his partnership with Beck on the ARMS tour delivered a powerful continuation of their late 70s collaboration, just 2 years before Jan Hammer's rise to mainstream fame with Miami Vice. The ARMS show band flew to the US in late November 1983. Rehearsals were held at Las Colinas soundstage in Texas. It was the same place where David Bowie's famous sessions happened back in April. Eric Clapton's set remained pretty much the same. Jeff Beck, on the other hand, added 2 cuts from 1972's Jeff Beck Group album, In the Ways of Definitely Maybe and their cover of Going Down. Also on the set was Jan Hammer's composition Blue Wind from Wired. Jimmy Page added Boogie Mama from Paul Rodgers' debut, plus Midnight Moonlight, released years later through The Firm. US ARMS shows 1 and 2 were held at the relatively new Dallas Reunion Arena, squeezed into the Dallas Mavericks' schedule between home games against Golden State and Houston. The venue had already hosted major acts in 1983, including Clapton, Rush, Journey, and The Police. Local reports noted that the first night's proceeds would cover tour costs, with the remainder going to the ARMS Foundation. For Jeff Beck, it was his first Dallas appearance since 1980, and for Jimmy Page, his first in the city since Led Zeppelin's opening night in April 1977, and you can check my documentary here on the channel. Promoted by Bill Graham alongside Louis Messina of Texas Jam fame, the shows marked a strong start, praised for the scale and purpose, even as some critics noted the absence of actual classic Yardbirds material. But there was no Yardbirds music. But hey, the former Yardbirds were there. Next stop on the tour was San Francisco, with 3 shows at the long-standing Cow Palace. Eric Clapton had been there in February, plus the likes of Iron Maiden, AC/DC, and yes, Puerto Rican pop band Menudo. Promoter Bill Graham introduced the All-Star Band. Names like Kenny Jones, Charlie Watts, and Bill Wyman got a huge roar. Ray Cooper didn't, but you can't blame people for not knowing who he was. He played on many records, but Eric Clapton came out on stage with a slick outfit to play his 1983 Roger Giffen Stratocaster. Keyboard duo Chris Staten and James Hooker provided their talents to the sound of Clapton's fiery slide guitar work. Eric switched to his Fender Blackie, while Andy Fairweather Lowe rocked a very 80s looking jacket. Ray Cooper's percussion showcase was well received in San Francisco, whose audience likely held him to the same standard as their local heroes, 1968 to 1971 Santana. Joe Cocker was next with a smooth continuation of Clapton's drenched blues style. Jeff Beck was next in matching soloist vibrations with Jan Hammer. The powerful duo shared musical telepathy, getting the best out of each other's technique. Beck looked confident and delivered guitar finesse of the highest order. Andy Fairweather Lowe joined them for People Get Ready, a hit single just waiting to hit the stores in 1985. James Patrick Page took the stage in deafening applause. He got the biggest welcome, not for the faint-hearted. The pressure was on. The closest thing to Led Zeppelin in the 80s, live at Cow Palace. Unlike the shows in September, there was no organ in these venues, so Prelude was played on piano. Page performed for the stage lights, breathing in, controlling tone on his Telecaster, movement and sound, a bit nervous in places. He thrilled the crowd like the master entertainer he is. Paul Rodgers joined him with one of the best voices of the evening. Both looked like the prequel to a band, and Rodgers took some of the pressure off Jimmy's shoulders. He was in good company. Page switched to his number 1 Les Paul to play Paul's Boogie Mama, yet Rodgers changed guitars real quick. He went for a Stratocaster instead. Notice how Jimmy's wearing the Les Paul a bit higher than his late 70s style. Next track was Midnight Moonlight on Page's Danelectro. Famously used for Kashmir, the guitar was now an open invitation into a feature anthem. Led Zeppelin's outtake was finally finished. But the piece de resistance was of course the double neck guitar. Jimmy's charismatic introduction set the stage for what followed. The Cow Palace exploded. I have to mention just how tricky it must have been for Page to play Stairway to Heaven without vocals, and Robert Plant's live cues. My guess is that the band agreed on signals to play a shorter version of Stairway. Jimmy had some trouble on the iconic D chord before the solo, but on he went. Audiences were in for one of the tour's surprises. Clapton and Beck slowly joining him on Stairway. Jimmy's shredding was pure stuntman. Clapton's face is priceless here, probably wondering, hey Jimmy, are we gonna get a chance to solo here? Page switched to rhythm while his former Yardbird mates played tasteful lines over the classic rock staple. Jimmy was so invested in the song that you can see Clapton and Beck trying to get some eye contact with him. The All-Star Band joined forces for the high stakes of Layla, just like their shows in London, but then they got into With a Little Help from My Friends. This song was historic because Jimmy Page recorded the famous lead guitar parts for Cocker's album that was released in 1969. To have the whole band do this number was like a Woodstock full circle, a brotherhood reunited, the 1960s memories into the 80s of chance, and whatever the future meant for them. Ronnie Lane took the stage. His message says it all.
What do you think of my friends?
Closing the evening on a high note, a 2.5-hour show was over. The finish line and final bow to the crowd, and then they were 16 musicians on stage. Shows 6 and 7 moved down to Los Angeles, the mythical forum where rock and roll history had been made since the late 60s. Both dates were squeezed in right after the Lakers game against the Clippers. Clapton hadn't played Inglewood's Forum since 1976, while Page's last show took place on June 27th as a part of a 6-night series with Led Zeppelin, considered one of the best runs of their career. You can check my 3-part documentary series here on the channel. Now on the other hand, this was Jeff Beck's first time at the Forum. The LA Times gave an interesting review, as it sort of backs the theory of Jimmy being the guitarist who felt the biggest pressure of returning to the Forum. The reviewers said Paul Rodgers would be an ideal candidate if they ever formed a supergroup. Jimmy took note of this, it seems. Midnight Moonlight was incorrectly referenced as Bird on the Wing. Clapton was set to open with an inviting blues set, while Cocker was said to be marginally effective. Jeff Beck's turn was called vigorous, but undistinguished.
It's not just for me, it's maybe for all the people that have got this thing going on for them, you know? That's what I hope. Anyway, I hope that anyone that's got this thing come on and gets a little bit of strength from it, you know? Because it really does put you in the pits.
Last 2 shows of the tour were held on the East Coast, one last stop before they went back home. 2 nights at Madison Square Garden, right after the Knicks game against Denver. The British Are Coming tour came to an end on December 8th and 9th, 1983. With previous visits by Robert Plant and Genesis, what better way to end the Garden's concert year than with the Yardbirds reunion? Eric Clapton's last show there was back in 1974, while Page played a 6-night series with Led Zeppelin in June 1977, and just like LA, New York fans wanted Stairway to Heaven. Guest star Ronnie Wood joined Eric Clapton's set in New York with a red jacket and a Telecaster guitar. 3 Rolling Stone members on stage, rocking out to the late 70s soundtrack of Excess and 80s Redemption. A packed house. Madison Square Garden was all about British rock. It seemed red was the trending color. Eric Clapton's red guitar strap, Chris Stayton's jacket, and Joe Cocker's t-shirt. You're So Beautiful was an inspiration number for the Joe Cocker mannerisms and poetic suffering. Jan Hammer and Jeff Beck wore almost Miami Vice matching colors. A frenetic run, lead guitar and synth trails, consistent throughout the tour. A technical display of skill, heart, and conviction. Beck's Madison Square Garden debut had him dedicate People Get Ready to John Lennon on the 3rd anniversary of his tragic death in the Big Apple. The result? Magnificent.
It was a sad day 3 years ago to the day today. We're going to try and think of John while we do this tune.
Jimmy Page on stage. New York couldn't believe it. Now he was back, wearing a familiar jacket, the one he used at Zeppelin's last show in Oakland. Rock and roll fans' dream was fulfilled. Page looked happy. Everybody was.
Well, believe it or not, that was a piece by Chopin.
The Paul Rodgers attack felt stronger. With every passing show, the more people wondered if they put a band together. While Page may have missed a note or two, the attitude was there. Now something happened to his brown Telecaster, so he switched to a spare one middle way through Who's to Blame. Who's to blame for it? The guitar tech? The guitar? The venue's electricity? Jimmy went full Page, delivering his signature Pageness. Matching Les Pauls, the Rodgers and Page attack, Bad Company and Led Zeppelin. Was it Led Company? Comeback mode. The stage had reinvigorated Page back into his performer nature thanks to Rodgers' commanding presence. Nothing like a sidekick who understands what rock and roll demands, and also a sidekick who also made millions of dollars. Midnight Moonlight sounded massive. The blue light colors invited the crowd into the old cosmic energy. Jimmy worked his way around the Phrygian scales of 1977 in the somewhat unstable Dan Electro tuning. Once again, Stairway got an ovation, not a guitar, but the audience on its feet. What if Led Zeppelin played the East Coast in 1980? Well, this was the closest thing to an answer. I don't judge Page's performance from a technical standpoint because the emotion was there. What the world became since John Bonham's passing was tough. This tour was his cathartic statement. Layla was one of the best sounding versions from the concert series, and it was closing night in New York, a photo finish conclusion to a rock and roll adventure. Producer Glyn Johns, the man who put the first Arms shows together in London, was there, a ceremony like no other. And he wasn't probably talking to Jimmy Page because Glyn Johns wanted producer credit on a Zeppelin 1, and guess what happened? Jimmy said, no, I'm the guy producing this. But despite it all, these were fun times, good times. Ronnie Lane continued his fight against multiple sclerosis, undergoing various treatments, including hyperbaric oxygen therapy. But alongside that effort, a troubling reality began to emerge around the Arms US Tour's fundraising. A $1 million check from the concerts was used to establish the Arms of America headquarters in Houston, including a toll-free line for patients to share their experiences. However, by 1986, press reports indicated that nearly $900,000 of the funds had effectively vanished, prompting investigations into the handling of the proceeds. Reports pointed to a complex web of administrative costs, legal structures, and organizational decisions that blurred the lines of where the money went, far removed from the Arms show's original intent. There was no clear indication that Ronnie Lane was involved in the handling of those funds. On the contrary, he was left confused and among those most affected by the outcome. Lane was ultimately left financially strained and uncertain. Further benefit shows followed, including a Faces reunion at Wembley Stadium, but his condition continued to take its toll. By 1990, he was still performing when he could, sometimes singing, sometimes resting, all while being seated, conserving what little strength remained. Support from friends and fellow musicians including Ronnie Wood, Rod Stewart, Bill Wyman, and Jim Page helped him sustain his medical care through the following years. Ronnie Lane passed away on June 4th, 1997 in Colorado. His memory and the cause that brought so many together lives on.